Hello and welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you here today. I'd just like to take a few moments to go through some of our basic housekeeping for our webinar this morning. So my name is Meredith Terry, and I work with Fundraising Academy as a trainer, and we have our wonderful presenter here today, Jim Flores. So welcome, Jim. He's going to share with us all kinds of wonderful information today about strategic planning and how it's a guide for fundraising professionals. So we hope you find this really informational. Just so you know, you can interact with us through the chat, and we encourage you to do so. We'll be monitoring the chat box as we go through today. So feel free to drop your questions and comments directly into the chat box, and we'll call attention to them as we go through. Let's talk a little bit about Fundraising Academy. So Fundraising Academy at National University is headquartered in sunny California. We teach cause selling accelerate. So we teach fundraisers how to view their role as fundraisers a little bit differently and look at it kind of in the same lens that our counterparts in the for-profit world do so. We have all kinds of really wonderful resources and information that you can check out both online and in both synchronous and asynchronous formats. So we encourage you to take a look at those on our website. A little bit about myself. Again, my name is Meredith Tarian. I've been working with Fundraising Academy now for just about 6 months. My whole background has been in nonprofit fundraising for the past 13 years or so. So I'm happy to be here today with you, sharing some of my lessons learned throughout my career, and certainly supporting Jim as he shares the wealth of information that he's here to bring. Jim is our presenter today. I'm just going to give a quick, brief intro to Jim and then kind of turn it over to him. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm excited to introduce Jim Flores. Jim's nonprofit career spans nearly 4 decades as a development director and CEO at various organizations. He's received numerous awards, including the National Burn Prevention Award, the San Diego County Fire Chiefs Maltese Award, the AFP Outstanding Development Professional Award, and the Nonprofit CEO of the Year Award twice. Jim left the food bank in 2021 to pursue his consulting business and passion for the nonprofit sector. So Jim, we are thrilled to have you here with us today. Please feel free to share with us anything about yourself that you'd like our participants to know. And with that, I'll hand it over to you for all of the good stuff.
Well, thanks very much, Meredith. And just I want to say how excited I am to be here. And, those awards are great, but if you're around long enough, you probably end up getting a few awards. So that's part of that. But the Development Professional of the Year, receiving that was probably the most special because CEOs don't tend to get that award. So that's what I'm a bit proud of. Thrilled to have you all today and talking about the development role in strategic planning. And I've tended in my history because I was a development officer for a while, but mostly as a CEO. So I've always looked at strategic planning from the 30,000-foot level, from a leadership position, either as a board member, a board chair, or as a CEO or a consultant. So today we're really going to talk about how you can play a pivotal role in creating the strategy for a strategic planning session, although there's a chance that you may not even be attending the retreat, but you could this would be your opportunity during the pre-planning to really ensure that development has a strong place in the organization's strategic planning process. I'm a big believer in interactive, and there's a lot of stuff we're going to talk about today. Some of it you may know, some of you might not know. Some of it might be something that you could maybe look up in a book. But what really I think would be more beneficial to you and probably more fun for me and Meredith is if it's more interactive. So as we're going through our slides and you have questions or needs or problems, I would rather address those, and we will keep an eye on our time to make sure we get through our entire presentation. But my hope is that you leave this presentation with a couple tips, maybe a few things that, oh, I knew I was supposed to do that, I just kind of fell away from it. Or maybe you learned something, but in a perfect world, when you hit the new year running after the holidays, you've picked up a couple things that can be useful to you and a couple tips. So as Meredith mentioned, 40 years in nonprofit, 29 as a CEO. There's probably not anything I haven't seen or experienced. So again, if we can help you in real time to improve your game, that's our goal. So I think we'll kind of get going. We're going to talk about today, what makes a strong board. That is, we'll talk in depth about that, how to establish expectations from the very beginning, and then techniques on board engagement and fundraising, because we know that you can't have a great organization without a great board. So the definition of strategic planning is a process in which a company's executives decide on what they want to achieve, the best actions and resources for doing that. So really, you want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of strategic planning. Well, every organization needs direction, and every organization needs a strategic plan, and how you get there and how you build consensus and have everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. That's the good. The bad is that sometimes the plan is not practical. It's too unwieldy. It's expecting too much, and the organization may not have the resources to achieve those goals. So it's a pretty document, but it's really not very useful. And that really rolls into the ugly. I don't know how many times I've seen this, especially in my consulting business, where organizations create a beautiful strategic plan and it's got wonderful photos and graphs, and it really maybe should be in a museum somewhere under museum glass with a special light shining down on it. And pretty much as soon as the final plan is finished, it ends up in a drawer. It's not tactical. It's a little too big for the moment. And suddenly the organization doesn't utilize the plan. And so it may be something that you can send to funders, but really it's not tactical. And so please ensure that your organization, once you come up with a strategic plan and a direction and a vision, that you ensure that it is tactical, and that strategic plan is brought out during staff meetings and during board meetings, so the board and the staff can track that you're actually achieving the vision that was set forth. So, fundraising is king, and fundraisers play a pivotal role in educating and building a foundation for a strategic plan. And, I'm a fundraiser first and foremost, and any strong strategic plan has to have fundraising as a major component. Even in my experience as a CEO, sometimes I went into a strategic planning process really just to get the board engaged in fundraising. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing an organization does is raise money. Because if you don't have money, you don't have programs. And so really that is a fundamental key, and it's important that you recruit board and staff that understand that fundraising is your number one organizational priority. So as Meredith mentioned, and I mentioned a little bit, I'm a career nonprofit guy. It is not the career I set out for, but sometimes things just seem to happen to you. And I fell into a internship at Project Concern International, the world headquarters here in San Diego. I started out in communications, but then they found out I was successful in fundraising. So guess what? I'm a fundraiser, because again, as I said, fundraising is king. And then from there, went on to the San Diego Burn Institute as the development director. And then 18 months after I joined the agency, the board removed the CEO. The board was kind of freaked out, and they looked at me and they said, "You're the interim CEO." And it was actually on my 33rd birthday. And back then, you didn't see CEOs that were, in their 30s. Nowadays you have the wonder kids in their 20s and 30s that are CEOs, but back then, all the CEOs kind of look like I do today. They're all in their 50s and 60s, and here I am, 33 years old. I'm a CEO. I have no management experience. I have no management training. But the one thing I did have is I could raise money. And if you can raise money and keep the doors open and the staff paid and the programs moving forward, you can kind of figure out the rest. And then from there, went on to the San Diego Food Bank, and that was a remarkable experience. About 9 years, led that organization through the COVID crisis, which was crazy. And I will tell you that we had, remarkable success in fundraising during the COVID crisis. But what I have told many people and many of our clients is that everything we did before COVID is why we were successful during COVID. So we had a very strong development program that was firing on all cylinders. We had a tremendous relationship with donors, the community, elected officials, media, great board, great volunteer base. And all that is just really about building excellence and having a strong business model. But we had developed such great relationships with our donors many times. Donors came to us before we could even get to them asking how they can help. And that's the relationship that all good development people are really looking to build is as having those investors in your cause. And then I left after COVID and now doing my consulting business full time. The one thing that I kind of had forgotten is that I was always the chief development officer in all my organizations, really anyway, even as a CEO. But in early mid 2019, my VP of development left, and I chose not to rehire the position. So during COVID, I served as both the CEO and the VP of development. And we had a budget of we were raising about $14 million a year. Before COVID, we raised $50 million in a year. And it was the Wild West for sure. So people who philanthropy is king, right? I mean, I am a perfect example of that. I think that you really think about your career and your journey and what it's going to mean, and at the end of your career, you really start thinking about legacy and what has your life meant, and to have made the world a better place. That's a very strong legacy. So those of you who are on today and you're maybe in the middle of your career in development or working for a nonprofit, you realize that paycheck's a paycheck. You're never going to make as much money as you probably need, but knowing that your efforts are making the world a better place, that is something that should fuel you. Floros is Greek, and so I was taught early on in my life of a word called philotomo, and it is you can look it up. There's a great YouTube video about it, but it's you can't be Greek without being having philotomo. Philotomo is a word that has no definition that means everything to being a Greek, and really what it is about love of humanity, service before self, doing the right thing, social responsibility. It's really about a pride in your local community, your family, your country, and doing things for others without expecting anything in return. And in fact, I have a nonprofit CEO coaching group here in San Diego, and it's called the Philotomo Sessions, because anybody who works for a nonprofit has Philotomo. And all of you who've logged on today, you have Philotomo. So if you don't remember anything today, maybe that you picked up at least one tip. Okay, we have our first poll. So in the chat box, that Meredith is going to do a fabulous job of monitoring. So we're curious about what is our audience today? How long have you been in fundraising? So we really can fine tune our comments. So please fill out the poll. Let us know. Have you been less than 2 years, less than 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or more than 10 years? We'll take a moment for all of you to vote.
These are some really interesting results here. It looks like we have a really interesting spread, Jim. Can you see these results on your screen as well?
I cannot. If you could share those for me, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and share here. So this is the spread we have. We have about 42% of our participants today are less than 2 years of experience in the fundraising profession. We have 21% that are less than 5 years. We have 13% that are between 5 and 10 years. And then we have 25% that are more than 10 years of experience in the fundraising profession. So it's actually almost a pretty even spread here. It's really interesting.
Outstanding. Well, what I would hope is that as we're going through this, and some of you who've been doing this a little longer, some of this may be old hat to you, but hopefully there's a couple of things that maybe or new, but maybe You were like, I kind of fell away from that. I need to get back to doing that. So please, as we're going and you have questions, things that we can do to help you based on trial and error and experience, let's do that. Um, okay, so we're going to move forward. So, um, why vision matters. Now, vision and mission is why you're in business. And so it is incredibly important that everybody's on the same page. And that is something that is a great outcome from a strategic plan, is that the board and staff alike know this is our mission, this is where we're going, this is what our objective is, and that when people are out talking about the organization, they talk about your elevator speech or what have you, that everybody again is rowing in the same direction, and that everybody knows exactly what your vision and mission is. Because as a fundraiser, you're kind of selling the cause, and so you need to really know what that is. Next kind of thing I want to talk about is a board of directors. You cannot have a great organization without a great board of directors. It is, in my experience, especially having been a CEO for about 29 years, that a board can be the best thing ever, and a good board is crucial to your success. But a bad board can destroy an organization. And what I'm seeing a lot in my consulting is we're being asked to come in and fix boards of directors because maybe there was not enough influence by the staff and not enough training, not enough preparation of what the expectations are. And then sometimes board members think that they're running the day-to-day operations. So again, being very selective of how you create a board and what the roles and responsibilities of the board are really a key to your success. Okay, we've got another poll, and I want to know about your boards. As I said, great boards are great. Horrible boards are the worst and can destroy an organization. So take a moment and let's kind of get an idea of the temperature of what your board is like.
Okay, I don't see any results on this poll just yet, but it is pretty interesting fact. Here we go. Here we have the results right now.
Okay.
Does your board have a clearly defined role and responsibility that includes fundraising? This one's really interesting, Jim. So 70% of our participants have told us no, their board does not have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. On the second question, are they aware that fundraising is a large part of their duties as a board member? Again, 70% have said no.
Wow. Okay. So if your organization is struggling, there it is. And one of the things that I see a lot, and you guys may be working for organizations that are in this very predicament, it's more common that it's not, is that people are invited to join the board and the board hasn't identified clearly what the roles and responsibilities are. And we'll go in and do board retreats, and I do kind of a nonprofit one-on-one presentation, and we talk about the importance of fundraising, and we have 10-20% of the board members resign off the board who say, well, I didn't join the board to fundraise. I joined the board so I could sit in a room and give people my advice, which is very dangerous. One little tip that you may be able to share with your executive team is the creation of an advisory board. And it's a very useful tool. And with every one of my organizations, I suggest if they don't have one, because an advisory board is a great stepping stone for people who maybe aren't ready for the fiduciary responsibility, but it's a stepping stone on. It's a great way to acknowledge big supporters. Maybe that's a place where you put elected officials. But an advisory board is also a soft landing place for a board member who is not comfortable with the direction of the organization. so they can take a step back. They can go to the advisory role. They don't have the same heavy lifting and fiduciary responsibilities as the full board. And sometimes that's a better place for these individuals. And again, you could talk to a lot of different people and they would have a different opinion. But to me, board's number one goal, objective, responsibility is ensure the organization has the financial resources to conduct programs. And so you have to have a board that in some way has some level of involvement with fundraising. So if there's a big takeaway today, Meredith, that's one right there, that fundraising is king.
Yep, I totally agree with you on that, Jim. I couldn't agree more. There's a saying that I always tend to go back to that's, it really emphasizes the effect that a board can have. And early on in my career, a colleague told me, your board can make or break your organization. And I think that that's probably pretty accurate.
And to dovetail on that, and kind of a tip for you guys going forward, and some of you development people, especially the ones who've been around longer than 10 years, the next step in your career may be being a CEO. And I will tell you that I think all the best CEOs come from fundraising, because for obviously everything we've talked about already, but it's key, and it has to come through a strategic planning process, that the board clearly defines roles and responsibilities that involve fundraising and a give or get. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So now when you're recruiting new board members, they know this going in, and they don't know that maybe you haven't done this in the past. And so all they know is that, oh yeah, I have a give or get of 5K, and I'm supposed to, invite people and open doors and all that. So they don't know any different. So as organizations kind of pivot, they hit crossroads as far as organizationally what they want to do. This is a key step to ensure that as you're moving forward and recruiting new board members, they all know that fundraising is part of their responsibility. Let's see here. All right.
Let's see
All
if
right.
we can advance to our next slide now.
Okay. So yeah, next one is another poll question. And it is, does your board's roles and responsibilities include a give or get? Well, I just gave you a long speech on that, but please answer that question. And I'm guessing that 70% of you are going to say no.
We're starting to get some results in on this one already. As you suspected, it looks like we are leaning a little more towards the no side. Did your board's roles and responsibility include a give or get policy? Right now, we are at about 65% answering no, it does not. For the second question, are they engaged in fundraising? I'm seeing that we have about 60% saying no, they're not. So again, what we're seeing is again indicating that we have some inactive boards, boards that are less than effective in fundraising or helping to participate in fundraising.
And I'd like to tell you that that's rare, but it's probably not. So one little tip for people, sometimes board members don't know how to fundraise, and they think that fundraising for them is just to go out into the wilderness and just start asking people for money. And we all know we don't want that. And we need to have a cohesive program where the development staff, probably you, is a traffic cop, because you don't want a board member going after the same funding source, because now it looks like you don't know what you're doing. Well, your other board member just reached out to me, or a staff person. I had this happen where I already had a deal with a company. We had a year-long package, and suddenly a board member solicits them. And they come to me like, well, what's going on? I thought we had a deal. So you do need to manage that. You need to control your board and what they're doing. And some board members, all they have to do to be active in fundraising is to make introductions and open doors. And then the board member shows up at the meeting, says why they're involved as a volunteer, and then the staff does all the heavy lifting. You manage the process, and that donor, that is probably the best scenario. And some coaching, you can do art of the ask type of thing if you want to help your board members be even better at it. But really, if they just open doors, oftentimes that's good enough. So talking about responsibilities of the board, we kind of beat this up already, but this is a board retreat. And, one of the things that maybe you can offer, and again, I don't know what each and every one of your roles are during an actual strategic retreat. I mean, the 10 and over, if you're in a leadership position, you probably are in the room. If you're 2 years and younger, you're probably not. But you are maybe participating in the pre-meetings, and to ensure that the fundraising and sustainability is key and is going to be included in that retreat. These other things, fiscal management, strategic planning, diversity, equity, inclusion, these are all things that a board should be heavily engaged in. But for the sake of today and the fact that you are all development and fundraising professionals, really, again, it comes down to fundraising is king. Meredith, are there some questions in the chat that we might want to respond to?
So we don't have any questions just yet, Jim, but there's some interesting comments that had related to our last poll. So Mark has shared with us that if your board isn't willing to make a gift, why should anyone else? And I think that that's it's a really good comment. He also said that if there was an option for sometimes to the poll question on whether or not your board was engaged in fundraising, he said the answer would have been yes. So I think what that indicates there is that there are some folks here who say, I have a board that's sometimes engaged, but not always engaged. And so it depends on what the activity is or what the event is. And so there are board members that are maybe not consistent in their engagement.
So one of the things that I've spoken at some different conferences, and a lot of CEOs and development directors on one side of the room, and board members on the other side of the room. And I hear from staff when my board's not involved with fundraising. And I use the analysis that, if you're in management, and let's say I'm a CEO and I have an underperforming employee. So the first thing I do is ask their manager, are you preparing this person? Are you setting this person up for success? Or have you made the expectations of the position very clear? And so they go, well, no, I haven't. And so, well, they should know better. Well, not really. And it's the same thing with staff and board members. They may not know. And so I really think it's the responsibility, and maybe the CEO has to play a role in this. It's really important for the development staff to set your board members up for success. If they're inconsistent, that's because the staff has not consistently provided them with opportunity. So that's one thing I'll tell you, Mark, and your comment about, if they're not willing to make a gift, how is anybody else going to do that? You're spot on, man. I will tell you that when I came to the food bank, it was a non-fundraising, non-giving board. And probably my third or fourth board meeting, I told the board we'd been disqualified from 3 foundation grants because we did not have 100% giving. So that was an aha moment for the board. And one of the board members said, well, no one asked. So, I think that's a little lame, but no one asked. No one created that vehicle. So as a development professional, and again, probably a lot of this has to go through your CEO, who then takes it to the board chair or the chair of the development committee. You have to consistently create opportunities. Now, one of the things that's important to talk about a board, and some people have said that the structure of a nonprofit board is archaic, and it's something that's maybe run its course, because if you really think about it, you have a group of volunteers. They're volunteers. So that means they have careers and lives and families and hobbies, and they got other stuff going on in their life. Maybe they serve on several other boards, right? And so you realize that the time you have with that board member is precious, and you have to make the most of that. And so the idea is that board members check in, you create an opportunity for them to make an impact, feel good about what they're doing, and then they check out because they got other stuff going on. And you have a board of directors who are volunteers, who aren't necessarily experts in the cause, aren't necessarily experts in running a nonprofit, and are probably not experts in fundraising. When you're recruiting board members, you start looking for people who are in sales, people maybe in media outlets or what have you, and people who have a sales mentality tend to make better fundraisers, because fundraising in a lot of ways is selling. But again, you need to not assume board members know what they're supposed to do or how to do it. And that really falls on you. And it's an excellent use of your time. And some board members will appreciate getting training on fundraising. So let's just talk about some ways your boards can help you. Some of this I've probably kind of already covered, but again, you got to know your mission, purpose, and priorities. Everybody's pulling in the same direction. You know what everybody's roles and responsibilities are. I know a lot of organizations, their boards actually have a job description for each committee, and they require that each board member serve on at least one committee. And really, the role of the fund development committee on the board is really just peer to peer to engage the fellow board members about here are these opportunities, here's things that are going on, what have you. Some of you may actually, I've used a thing called a board achievement report. It's kind of like a report card. And we do that once a year, and that it's confidential, but we send that out to each board member so they can really capture what they did in the year prior. That's a great tool. So again, making sure that they're clear about their roles and responsibilities. Obviously, support the chief development officer, and that is again is as much as you can as a staff person influence the board. Again, you're going to need your CEO. Again, you're going to need your board chair and your chair of your development committee to really work with you and support you. Effective planning, obviously, that's creating the road ahead, and then just keeping tabs on effectiveness of programs, making sure that organizations aren't experiencing mission drift where they're getting off their mission just to follow money. So that's some of the things that a board can do. Number 6 is key: legal and ethical integrity. Your your um, your reputation in town is key, and fundraising is so competitive that sometimes when donors are trying to decide which agencies they're going to give to, they're almost looking for reasons why they're not going to support a nonprofit. Because again, there's so many in San Diego County. There's 15,000 nonprofits, so the competition is crazy. So, is it a well-run business? Is it ethical? Are the financials, bulletproof? They're 4 stars on Charity Navigator. I mean, donors, sophisticated donors, are looking at your organizational integrity, and is this a good place where my contribution is an investment and will be used the way it's intended and being used effectively. Your reputation in town, again, that goes to the same thing. Ensuring that donor gifts are used as intended. I've heard horror stories of a major donor makes a gift and the organization has cash flow problems, so they don't spend the money where the donor wants to. Well, guess what? That donor is never given to you again. So again, that is key. And if the donor wants that money designated to a specific program, you have the responsibility to ensure that that money is spent on that donor's designation. And again, protecting donor privacy, that's key. Please never go and sell your donor list to somebody that'll make a donation. Please be careful that, if you have an organization that has high visibility, you'll have people who will come to you wanting to make a gift or partner with you, and it's kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing, but then they want to have access to your mailing list to promote their own business. So be very, very careful about that, because sometimes they say they love your cause, but really they're just trying to promote their own agenda. And creating enthusiastic advocates for the cause. So your board members are your ambassadors, and these are, hopefully you've built a board of people who have large spheres of influence. They know people in town. You got to make sure that they're well educated. A great idea is that at each board meeting, maybe have a presentation from someone from the program team to talk about a program, something that you're doing that's exciting. Because I always wanted my board members, when they left that boardroom, with a little extra, did you know that the food bank or whoever it is doing this, or we're doing that, or what have you. So don't expect them to pick up on this stuff themselves. You got to spoon feed it, make sure they're informed. Many times organizations will create a cheat sheet for the board members, So if suddenly somebody calls them and asks them, why should I support your gala? And they've got a cheat sheet in their drawer that has five facts about the organization and what they're doing. Again, you manage your board without your board really knowing you're managing them, but deep down they know you're managing them and they want to be managed. So there's tremendous finesse involved with that. Again, that's something that your CEO probably is taking the lead on that. But I knew my development staff were always asking me for things, whispering in my ears about things that they wanted or needed the board to do. And then that CEO is talking to the board chair or the committee chairs to make sure those things are happening. Um, so again, just having talking points and really empowering your board members to go out in the community. And personally, I mean, some organizations like small boards. I like big boards, and I like big boards because looking through a fundraising lens, every board member has a sphere of influence. And so if I have a board of 20, that's 20 board members, that's 20 spheres of influence. And if I got six board members, now I only have six spheres of influence. So I always opted for bigger boards. That's on the burden of the burden is on the CEO to manage that. And then if you want to have a working committee structure, how do you have six committees and eight board members? Everybody's on every committee. So again, I'm a big advocate of bigger boards.
Hey, Jim,
Yes.
I have a couple of questions in the chat box I just want to call attention to, one in
Sure.
particular. One of our participants said, can you share some strategies for someone early in their career to bring board responsibilities to the attention of the leadership? He says, I keep hearing about leading up, but some of these issues are high above my pay grade.
Well, so if you're like a mid-level development coordinator, obviously, I'm guessing that you must have some interaction with your boss. So that's the VP of philanthropy, and director of development, whatever your agency. So it's during those interactions that you talk to your boss and say, I've gone through these seminars, I'm doing this research, and how do we get the board a little more engaged in fundraising? Then, because you can't do an end around on your boss because that's not a good career move. And then from there, you hope that that development director or VP of philanthropy can then engage the CEO to say, hi, how do we get the board more engaged? And then it's the CEO's responsibility to maybe take it to the board chair. I know people, very talented development people, whose CEO is maybe a former CFO. So they don't think like a fundraiser, they think like a finance person. A CFO as a CEO, many times, if there's a cash flow problem, their knee-jerk reaction is to cut. We're going to cut things because we have poor cash flow. As a fundraiser, if I was having issues with the cash flow, my knee-jerk reaction is I got to go raise more money because I don't want to compromise these programs. I don't want to reduce these programs. So it's a slippery slope because you're not in a position of authority. So you have to demonstrate loyalty and respect. But I would hope that your boss is open to having a conversation about it. And your VP of development may say, yeah, good luck. I've been singing that song for years, but it's falling on deaf ears. So it is tough, but it's got to be done correctly and with finesse. And sometimes if you're clever and you're having that conversation, if you're clever enough, you can make it seem like it's somebody's their idea. So instead of saying, I think we should do this, you do an open-ended question saying, well, what do you think about this? Or do you think this is a good idea? And suddenly that person in authority answers it. They think it's their idea, they own it, and now they'll do it. And you've actually kind of manipulated that sequence. I don't know. Did I answer your question more or less?
I think I think so. Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Jim.
But I just figure if I talk enough at some point, they'd be satisfied with my answer. So create a cohesive fund development plan. Again, you want to be as diversified as possible because if one category dips one year, um, then maybe another category can pick that up. So it's key that you have You have your events, and hopefully you guys are not working for organizations that are too dependent on events, but that is more common than not. Grants are great. Again, I hope you guys are not working for an organization that is completely grant dependent. Again, more common that it's not. And a lot of organizations really struggle with really seeking out individual donors, and that is king. That every fundraising strategy you guys have maybe ever seen. You've probably seen the donor pyramid of how you're moving and upgrading donors over time. It all is about individual donors, and probably 80-90% of all philanthropy is really truly from individual donors. Being too government dependent is a slippery slope, because it's great when you have it, but suddenly if there's a new administration, or there's or the government has a different approach or a different priority, and your agency loses out, now you're in a tough spot. So again, maybe 20% in each of those categories makes you a stronger organization. All right. So, so fundraising preparation. Obviously, we talked a lot about some of this already, as mission and goals, um, a case for support. A lot of organizations um, are fully entrenched in creating a case for support. I have to be candid with you. In both of my organizations, we did not have a case for support, but we had all that information, and we had all that visioning. And what I'm seeing more so in my consulting business, the great thing about a case for support is, the front half talks about what you've done, your track record of success, why you're the organization that is, moving the needle the most. But the second half of a case for support, it forces the organization to have a vision for the future. Where are you going? Where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years or what have you? Program expansion, new initiatives, or what have you. And many times what you find out with donors is, they may not want to fund what you've been doing, although, that's too bad because they're probably successful. But a lot of times donors are excited about funding where you're going. So that alone is a reason to have a strong case for support. And it's something that is almost like a business prospectus, and it's something that you can sit down, especially with major donors, get feedback from them, and see if this is something they might want to support. Fundraising and communications plan, and I think we're going to talk about communication a little bit down the road, but they are hand in glove. Your communications program should be an integral part of your fundraising program. Gift acceptance policy is important. A lot of times organizations only plan for failure, and they don't plan for success. And what happens if suddenly somebody leaves you $5 million? What are you going to do with it? And what's your policy? And also, are you going to put some of that in an endowment, put that in reserves, put it into operating? So having, the forethought of thinking about how you would handle something like that is key. And that's generally done at an executive or a board level. The donor policy, what you will and will not do, and then donor stewardship, and how you're going to recognize your board members. One of the things we should have asked Meredith is what is their process for donor acknowledgments or thank yous, because that's the other thing that probably going to go a little sideways on you. But organizations, if you don't get a thank you donor acknowledgement out quickly, then the donor tends to believe that their donation wasn't needed or wasn't that important. And I will confess that earlier on in my career as a development professional, I was so focused on the next gift that I didn't do a great job of getting thank you letters out on a timely basis. And then actually somebody who worked for me said to me, your thank you letter is your first step towards the next contribution from that person. And just with that one comment, it totally changed my attitude, and realized if you're really focused on donor cultivation and stewardship, that thank you letter in a timely fashion, and the name is spelled correctly, and the dollar amount is correct, that is key to really truly stewarding a donor for future contributions.
Okay, for this next one here, we have community share. The question is, how does your CEO or executive director lead your organization? For this one, we don't have a poll, so please give us your comments in the chat box here. And just to be mindful of time, we want to keep moving. So I'll be monitoring those comments in the chat box here and call attention to a few of them. But go ahead and leave us your thoughts on this one in the chat box, and Jim, we'll go ahead and keep going.
Sounds great. So, your role in all this, and again, as I mentioned earlier, depending on where you are within your organization, if you've been there probably more than 10 years, you probably have more influence. But you know, I've said it probably 50 times that fundraising is king. And so your job is to really empower your leadership, and whether it's your CEO, your VP of development, and most importantly, your board, empowering them and preparing them to be involved with fundraising. And in a little bit, Meredith's going to talk about the cause selling cycle. And really, it is, I mean, if you could do a presentation at the retreat on fundraising and the importance and how and what your process is, that would be a 10 out of a possible 10, because you are educating your board about what you are actually doing. We have a fundraising program, a method. If it's the cause selling cycle, like National University advocates for, whatever that is, educate your board. This is what we're doing at a staff level, and here's the role that you can play in making that successful. So that is, I think that would be key. And then, importance of fundraising and culture of philanthropy. So again, everybody in the organization, staff and board alike, fundraising is the reason and the way that we are going to serve people and improve the quality of life for people. So it's just always having that culture. And we're going to talk about this, I think, a little bit later, about even everybody on staff should have some role in fundraising. Diversifying revenue streams. And kind of, we talked about that. I don't know how many organizations I know that they're super dependent on grants and events. And what I do tell people, and I won't spend too much time on this slide, is that if you are doing events only to raise money, to only help with cash flow, then you really shouldn't do events, because there's more effective, more efficient ways to raise money. Events take a lot of time and effort. But if you look at an event as a donor cultivation tool, some of you have probably been to seminars where you see the famous fundraising pyramid. That event is how your people are introduced to your organization. And then that next step up is when you have an event donor becomes an agency donor. And you're doing that through a thank you letter, a newsletter, an engagement, year-end mailing, what have you. But now you're moving people up the food chain. Okay. Team collaboration. Fundraising is a team sport. It goes from everybody, from your CEO to your development coordinator, to the people who are inputting your data and doing the thank you letters. So everybody wins when you're successful, and everybody fails when you're not. And then so it's not just on one person or not. The board must be a fundraiser, but your rest of your staff who may not have fundraising responsibilities actually are advocates and ambassadors in their day-to-day lives. So you want to make sure that if they want to keep getting a paycheck, they should always want to support fundraising. Developing a budget takes money to make money. And a lot of times, and I've had some good boards when we had a good year, they said, okay, let's invest some of that money on adding to development staff, maybe enhancing what we're doing in the media space, what have you. But again, it takes money to make money. It's an investment well spent. KPIs, obviously, that is, you got to be able to measure it. Even if you're just looking at the P&L and looking at how you're doing fundraising wise, by month and by category, that is the thing that the board is going to look at the most, and see how you're doing by category in fundraising. And we know that budgets, change, they evolve. a big gift comes in, a big gift doesn't come in, and then it's the board's obligation to make those adjustments. Again, measuring success. I will tell you that this is where, this is really about fundraising, but I'm going to expand it to that your program staff needs to measure the success and be able to give you the ammunition, whether it's on grants or engaging donors. But big donors, sophisticated funding sources want to see measurable results of how your programs were effective. How not just not how many people you serve, that's fine, but how their lives been improved, better academic outcomes, better whatever your program, whatever your cause is. Your program staff has to measure the success of your programs and services, because that is giving you the ammunition to promote to donors, the media, and your board of directors, for that matter. Communication. I am a huge advocate in communications, and how that is, it's hand in glove with the development efforts that you're doing. This is how you're promoting your mission, promoting the opportunities. And a lot of nonprofits think that media, aside from social media, is just earned media, pitching a story and getting a 60-second or 90-second spot on the news. Those are fine, but I am a huge advocate of purchased media. And a lot of nonprofits cringe at that. But if you're running a business and you're selling an item, you would advertise that. And so what you'll find with media outlets, most nonprofits want everything for free. And if you can just bring a modest amount of money, you could probably leverage that media buy by 8 or 9 or 10 to 1. A lot of times TV and radio stations have excess inventory. And now if there's a nonprofit that's actually bringing a little money to the table, they will give you that extra inventory for free, because they want to fill the airwaves, and they've got the inventory. And here's somebody that I'm hoping will spend more money. And if you don't think that your board will go for having a communications budget for media buys, then you go out and find corporate sponsors who want to see their face on TV, they want to see their logo in your activities, and now get them to underwrite the cost of that media buy. And then when you're doing media, you're doing a PSA or whatever you're doing, you put them on TV with you. And what I found a lot was that I would get companies that would take money out of their marketing budget and support us through that. It wasn't just through their philanthropy budget. So if there's a key takeaway, it's probably one of the things that separated me from a lot of my peers, is that purchase media is something that should be part of your overall strategy. And when you pitch a news item and it shows up on the news, you don't control that. When you purchase media, you control what it is, what the message is, and when it's placed. And that is key. Risk management, obviously, an organization needs to be able to be prepared for bad times. A lot of organizations do not have ample reserves during COVID, and they really struggled. So having that 6 months of operating budget is really key. Some nonprofits actually have a policy where X number of percentage from every donation will go into reserves. So again, having that gold standard 6 months of reserves is key. Staff involvement, it's not just development staff. When I went to the food bank, we had everybody on staff wearing branded clothing, and it said staff underneath. And now when they're out in the community, they're picking up a carton of milk on their way home, and someone at the grocery store says, "Oh man, we love the work you're doing there at the food bank." Not only did that build the self-esteem and pride for that staff members, but that's a donor touch. That's people seeing your logo here, there, wherever. And then suddenly people get a piece of direct mail at the end of the year, and like, I don't know where I've seen them or heard about them, but I think they're doing good work. So branding is key, and your staff that may not have fundraising responsibilities still have that opportunity to promote your brand. All right, staff and board successful fundraising. We know that it is a team sport, and you can't be a great organization without it. So again, engaging board members, In fundraising, roles and responsibilities need to be, spoken, agreed to up front, not so much or not as much over past board members or current board members, but future board members. So that foundation has been laid. Board members should be comfortable with fundraising. And if they're not comfortable with fundraising, maybe it's another role in the organization. Maybe it's the advisory board. But again, if a board member knows that their fundraising responsibility is just making introductions and letting the staff do the heavy lifting, most board members are not freaked out by that. And I think in my fundraising career, and I've said this to plenty of board members, probably the strongest thing I've ever said is, what do we have to do to be considered? Because you don't want a hard sell. You don't want to twist somebody's arm just so that they may say, fine, I'll give you a gift because you worked them so hard. And then they never return an email. They never return a phone call. They see you at a cocktail party and they're walking the other way. So it should be a soft sell. You basically tell your story, why the organization is great, and let them make the decision. There's a Zen level of fundraising, and that's when the donor actually thinks it was their idea to make the gift. You've done everything else, and now on their terms, based on their budget, they'll decide, what is the best course for them. Again, building donor relationships. Your board, a lot of times boards will think, we just hired a new VP of development and they haven't raised $1 million in the first 6 months. What's going on with that? It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It's long-term relationships. That's especially key in individual donors. They tend to be more loyal because foundations sometimes don't want to fund in multiple years. Events go up and down, but having that donor retention and building those long-term relationships, that is key to success. Anybody can be a fundraiser. You just got to find out what that role is. And it's not always about asking for money. It's about talking about your cause, talking about your organization, having a very strong business model will sell people on your organization because they want to know that if I give money to this agency, it's a good investment of my time. Everybody has the opportunity to be an ambassador and an advocate. Board members, obviously, but staff members from the highest CEO down to the lowest position, they all have a vested interest in the success of fundraising.
So Jim, there's a really interesting story that I like to share that has to do with this idea that everyone's a fundraiser. And I
Great.
heard it really early in my career, and I'll share it briefly here. So in 1962, President Kennedy, went to visit the NASA facility. And as he's walking down the hall, he sees a janitor carrying a broom and a mop and a bucket of water. And President Kennedy stops and he says, "Hi, I'm Jack Kennedy. I'm the president. What do you do here?" And the janitor responds and he says, "Hi, Mr. President. I'm here to put a man on the moon." And the idea was that the janitor really understood the importance of his role, right? So he's the janitor in the building in the NASA facility. I mean, he's not a scientist, he's not an astronaut, but he understood that his contributions were there for the greater good, for the real mission there, which was to put a man on the moon. And I think that that is really important as we look at our role in fundraising. Everybody in your organization, from your board member down to your support staff or your administrative assistant, everybody is a fundraiser for your organization. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the cause selling cycle. This is really the foundation of our curriculum here at National University's Fundraising Academy. It's a very intentional 8-step framework. This graphic you're seeing in front of you here probably looks familiar. We've seen this cycle before in fundraising in our careers. I just want to call attention to a few things that are different here. The 8-step framework of the cause selling cycle is really designed to ensure that you don't miss key activities to supporting successful cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. So the idea here is that, everybody is selling something, right? So whether you realize it or not, I mean, you're already selling. You're selling your ideas, your perspectives, your priorities to almost everyone you meet. And in fundraising, you're selling your mission to your organization's mission to prospective donors or to supporters. So there's really three phases here in this cycle. Phase one consists of prospecting and pre-approach. Phase two is the approach, need discovery, the presentation to your donor, handling objections or questions from your donor. And then the phase three is the ask, right? This is the big part where you're making that solicitation to your donor. And then, of course, that also includes stewardship. So that being said, let's move on and talk a little bit about roles in fundraising. So there's really four different roles that we tend to view ourselves in or look at in fundraising. Each role is essential and they're all codependent upon each other to nurture really meaningful relationships with your organization's supporters or donors. I like to always tell folks that you don't need to talk donors into giving gifts. You want to listen donors into giving gifts. So, in other words, you want to really be able to understand what your donors' perceptions are of your organization. You want to understand what their objections are and kind of help to move them past that. So the four roles in fundraising really depend on which part of the cycle which part of the cycle you are in. So you're either prospecting, which consists of identifying and qualifying prospects. You could be a cultivator, which means that you're building relationships and trust with your donors or your supporters. You could be a solicitor, in which case you're asking for support or helping your donor to see how their gift can make an impact. Or you are a steward. So in that case, you're thanking your donor and you're ensuring that their gift makes the impact that they really intended for it to make. So let's talk specifically about prospectors. So prospectors are, this is really the idea of identifying the prospects who have a linkage to your organization. So think of this as folks who have an ability to give, and more importantly, an interest to give to the programs of your organization. Identifying prospects should be a board requirement. So this really goes hand in hand with everything Jim has been telling us today. This is a board role, identifying prospects. It should be included in all board member agreements. A lot of times I like to recommend to folks that you have a board member agreement that your board members agree to at the beginning of the year. So it could be like a simple contract or document that they sign that really outlines what their roles and responsibilities are. And it would very clearly define that they are prospectors. So they are here to help identify the names of people that they know in their networks who are interested in participating with your organization. We all know that our board members have a variety of contacts in their networks, right? I always like to tell my CEO or my board when I'm working with boards that I don't necessarily have the CEO of a like large Fortune 500 company. I don't have their contact information in my Rolodex, but it's quite possible that my board members do. So that's the role of the prospector. So again, we want to think of this process as distinguishing between suspects and prospects. And that's a really important piece to remember. So this idea of prospecting is absolutely a board role that we want to help our board members to recognize and give them very clearly defined roles on how they can participate in that process. Let's talk a little bit about cultivators. So cultivators, or the idea of cultivating, is meeting with potential donors. So getting to know them, building those relationships, and connecting them with the mission of your organization. So again, to everything Jim's been telling us today, your board can also serve as cultivators, and they should. Not only are they helping to introduce us to folks in their networks, but they're also helping to bring those folks into the organization and to help build those relationships. So we want your board members to think of themselves as ambassadors of the organization. They're really valuable in cultivating prospects out of their network. And remember, a lot of those folks will be peers to your board members. So the CEO of a Fortune 500 company may not be a peer to me as a fundraiser, but very well could be a peer or on a peer-to-peer level with one of my board members. So help them to recognize that they have a role as a cultivator as well. The other thing, kind of going back to this idea of having a board member agreement that your folks, your board members can sign in the beginning of the year, that kind of helps to identify, what they intend to do that year. It should have something in there that clearly defines and spells out that, your board members are expected to host events, to open their homes or to open their businesses, to host events. It could be a virtual event, it could be a face-to-face cocktail reception, it could be one of these Jeffersonian dinners in which you bring in a guest speaker or somebody on behalf of your organization who could really speak to the mission and the impact. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our board members recognize that they are cultivators. That's not only the role of the fundraiser. Let's talk a little bit about just celebrating success. So, it's really important that we recognize milestones and achievements throughout the process, that whole 8-step framework, that whole process of the cause selling cycle. It's really important that we slow down and just celebrate our milestones and celebrate our achievements through that process. So it helps us to boost team morale, and it's really going to keep your board members engaged. In the very beginning of the webinar today, we saw that like 70% of you acknowledged that your board is really not as engaged as they should be. This whole idea of celebrating success will boost team morale and kind of keep everybody motivated. If your board members can see the fruits of their labor, they're much more likely to be engaged and involved. So again, it's really important to just slow down and celebrate your success. Make sure you're including your board in all of the small wins that you're having. And I know sometimes as fundraisers, we tend to think that, if that the gift, right? The check that comes in the mail, that's the big reward, or that's like the big thing we should celebrate. But remember, there's so many steps in that cycle before the point in which we even ask for the gift. So if you're able to get a meeting with a potential donor, celebrate that, include your board members in that so that they can see, again, kind of the fruits of their labor and how their participation is yielding results. So that being said, drop your questions in the chat box here. I'm going to hand it back over to Jim so he can kind of wrap us up with final thoughts, give us a little bit of a summary and a debrief on what we learned today. And then we would love to open up the floor here for you all to ask questions and leave us comments. So feel free to interact with us through the Q&A feature. Also, just feel free to drop your comments in the chat box here and we'll be monitoring those. Go ahead, Jim, handing it back over to you.
Fantastic, Meredith. Loved every bit of that. I'll add a couple other things to complement what you said. So one of the things, when be strategic with board recruitment, and you have to find out what role that you can actually play in that, depending on where you are and your communication with your superiors or what have you. But a lot of times, if you recruit board members that are well connected and they are influential and they know a lot of people in town, and that they've served on other boards, now you go, wow, that is a candidate that maybe we want to see if we can get them engaged and have them join the board. So you start being strategic in who you're even approaching to be on the board. I'm not an advocate of organizations that have an open application for board membership. Someone should be approached to join the board. It should be seen as an honor and a privilege to join your board, and not just somebody that is warm and breathing. And again, make it seem like it's special. Also, if you're looking for a potential board member, and I remember having this happen in my career, that someone said, "Well, so and so has got time." You don't want that person, because if they got time, that means they don't do anything. You want somebody that's so busy that they're like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm overwhelmed. I've got too much going on." Well, busy people get things done, and so busy people will be some of your best board members. I still am such a huge advocate of teeing your board members up for success, putting them in a place to meet with a donor, to be in the right place at the right time. Many times what we would do is, if we had a hit list of corporations or foundations and that we identified that we wanted to solicit, we would go to our board and our development committee and say, here's our hit list. Does anybody know anybody with any of these organizations? Oh, well, this person works for, my neighbor is the president of Bank of America. I see him every morning. So you start kind of spoon feeding your board, taking advantage of their time and make it the most impactful, and try not to waste your board members with the administrative duties or what have you, because at the end of the day, it's about furthering the mission. I mentioned briefly, maybe you guys can reach out to Meredith and I can share this. I created an achievement report for board members. And we used to call it a report card. One of the board members felt it was a little juvenile, but it's a 2-page document. The front side talks about the person and the board member and what committees they serve on and their attendance at events. Then the flip side, we had a give. So you list different events and some miscellaneous categories, what they personally gave. The get, again, you're probably listing your events. Did they host a third-party event? Did they invite somebody in for a tour? Whatever they did, and you're just trying to capture the year in the past, the summary of what they did the year in the past. And the reason why no one ever complained and why it was successful is that we say it's not meant to be heavy-handed. We know we're going to miss things that you did that we didn't know about. You tell us what it is. We automatically, no questions asked, it goes in that document. It's also confidential. I've seen organizations that everybody sees everybody else's. That's not fair because everybody has different opportunities and different resources. So generally, it's your board chair, your governance chair, and maybe the staff members that had to accumulate all this information. I've used it with 2 organizations. I have probably a dozen nonprofits in San Diego County that are using some form of it. And if it's done well, it kind of motivates the board that they're being watched and they're being monitored. Ironically, usually after the report goes out, the next board meeting is the best attended board meeting of the year because they go, oh, wow, they're actually paying attention if I'm there or not. So again, that's a very effective tool if it's done correctly. So final thoughts. I mean, we've beat up a lot of these things today numerous times, but everybody needs to know the mission and the vision and where you're going. And if somebody says, oh, well, tell me about your organization, and you have that elevator speech, and you really want all the staff members from the highest to the lowest that they know that. I can go back to the food bank, and we had delivery drivers driving trucks and delivering food, and they were the best ambassadors. They were out in the community a lot, and people loved them, and they were branded with our logo, and they were charming and friendly, and it made people really like our organization and embrace what we were doing. You are key wherever you are in your career in the fundraising planning process. It's just a matter of how you're going to finesse that. If you're a longer term employee, you have more influence. But if you're a shorter term employee, well, someday you're going to be there. So, but engaging your higher ups and trying to learn and ask for advice and ask for guidance, that's key. If I see a strategic plan and fundraising is not a key part of that strategic plan, I cringe because that's an organization that's being naive and realizing that they have to, have the resources to further their mission. Please make sure, if you can, that the strategic plan is tactical. I see so often once the strategic plan is finished, it goes in a drawer and no one ever looks at it until the time for the next board meeting. And we open it up and go, oh, how did we do? Oh, we did pretty well. So tactical. I almost like action plans better than strategic plans. Again, educate and prepare. Coach your board members. Don't assume they know their responsibilities. Don't assume that they're comfortable doing this. Spoon feed them, tee them up for success. And actually, as a good development professional, you should be doing that with your CEO and teeing them up for success as well. You control the space, and you're guarded and measured about the success of fundraising. But make sure that you don't leave anything to chance. Don't assume that they know what they're supposed to be doing. Create opportunities for success. And again, fundraising is a team sport. In a development department, the person who's doing the data entry to ensure that that data is accurate, the donation's accurate, the thank you letter comes out in a timely fashion, because you send a donor a thank you letter, especially a bigger donor, it's a wrong dollar amount, you spelled their name wrong, guess what? And I will, leave one last little story before we get into Q&A. I was, in the beginning of my career, my CEO, I'm like 25 years old, 26 years old. He got a direct mail piece from another nonprofit. He wet his thumb and rubbed it across the signature to see if it smudged. because he wanted to see if that CEO had actually signed the letter. And I always stuck in my head. So as a CEO, I always signed as many letters as possible. And so when I was with the Burn Institute and then the food bank, any donor $500 or more, cumulative $500, I always signed the letter. Always did a formal salutation. If I knew the person, I scratched out "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith" and said "Bob and Susie." So I've personalized that thank you letter. That donor knows, hey, the CEO took the time to sign this letter and they know who I am. Maybe I should make another gift. So now, fast forward, I go over to the food bank. We're doing the same procedure. I'm signing these letters, and then we became a little more sophisticated, where my major gifts or my development officer researched every letter that I was signing. And maybe on 10 or 15%, there'd be a post-it note saying, this person sat at your table at the gala, you toured them, long-term donor for 14 years. And now not only am I signing, I'm always writing a little personal note like, thanks for your support, but I'm actually writing, new donor to the food bank. P.S. Welcome to the food bank. Long-term donor, thank you so much for your continued support. And I would take the time to sign all these letters because now these donors knew that they mattered and that the highest ranking official in the organization knew who they are and acknowledged that. Now we hit the COVID crisis. It is crazy. We've gone from feeding 350,000 people a month to 600,000 people a month, and it is Wild West, but we are raising money at an incredible clip. So now we're doing a lot of media. I'm signing all those thank you letters. And in 1 year's time, I signed 46,000 letters. 46,000 letters. I would bring them home on the weekend. I'd have 2 or 3,000 letters. I've told development directors I did that, and they almost got teary-eyed because they can't get their CEO to sign 5 letters. So if you can get your CEO to sign letters, to acknowledge donors, and make them feel like they matter, that is the key to success. That is as old school as it gets, but I'll tell you, it works. All right, Meredith, I'm turning the floor back to you. Thank you all for your time and attention. Let's have some great questions.
All righty. Let's see here. Do we have any questions that anybody wants to ask Jim today? We've got a couple minutes left here. If anybody has any questions, I don't see any just yet in the chat box. But what I do see is some comments here that the content today was really, really good. So we appreciate that. Hope you all found this to be really valuable. Jim and I can totally relate here, and we understand your struggle sometimes as fundraisers on engaging your board. Everything Jim said today is so valuable about having a strategic plan in place and what your role really as the fundraiser is in that process. So remember, you are here to kind of be the glue to kind of keep everybody together. Help your board members to recognize the fundraising cycle, that cause selling cycle. Share with them what their role is in that cycle and how they can serve as prospectors, cultivators, solicitors, and stewards. Because really, that's not just the role of the fundraiser, it's the role of everybody. So remember the story of President Kennedy and the NASA facility. I mean, everybody here is here to put a man on the moon, right? That's all of our roles. So that being said, we're so grateful that we had all of you join us today. I just want to leave you with a few comments here on how to connect with us. So connect with us at Fundraising Academy, Cause Selling Education. We have so many valuable resources on our website, including tons of webinars just like this that you can watch on demand. We have cohorts that you can join where we can go do a really deep dive for you into the cause selling cycle for you and your organization. If you're interested in something like that, we would love to work with you. You can connect with both of us on LinkedIn. You'll see Jim's LinkedIn link is right there. So feel free to reach out to both Jim and myself on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to connect with you and answer any additional questions you think of today. And don't forget to join our online learning portal for Fundraising Academy. Register.fundraising-academy.org. You can find all kinds of resources here on webinars and all kinds of, again, just really good stuff about fundraising and all of the 8 steps of that cause selling cycle. So if you're looking for something in particular on major gifts, or maybe you're looking for something on stewardship, or maybe you're looking for some resources on how to make the ask, go ahead, hop over to our online learning portal, and would be happy to share with you everything that we have. We look forward to hearing from you all again. Look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And thank you, Jim, for your time and your expertise today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for anything we can do to help. Thanks again. Happy holidays.